She slept in a windowless closet, ate cold leftovers after everyone else was done, and worked 17 hours a day without receiving a single dime. But she wasn't a servant to strangers. She was a daughter treated like a slave by her own mother, until a man with a watchful eye witnessed the unthinkable and decided to do something that would change 2 lives forever. Can you imagine waking up every day knowing that the person who should protect you is the exact one who hurts you the most? That the motherly love others receive naturally is, for you, just a distant concept you will never experience. Eleanor Abbott lived this nightmare every single day, never knowing there was another way to live. This story took place in the countryside of Georgia in March 1923, a time when cotton was still king and farms prospered while some lives withered in silence. Before we continue, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I love knowing that these stories from the past reach so many different places. And if you are enjoying this, please leave a like. It helps the channel grow and keep bringing you these stories of overcoming and hope. Eleanor was 19, but she seemed to carry the weariness of 3 lifetimes. Her brown hair, which could have been beautiful if anyone cared, was always pulled back in a tight bun that tugged at her temples and caused a constant headache. Her hands, which should have been soft in the bloom of youth, were calloused and rough, with small cuts that never had time to heal completely. Broken nails, inflamed cuticles, fingers swollen from scrubbing clothes on the washboard. But it was her eyes that told the saddest story. Honey-colored eyes that could have shone with dreams and hope, but had learned early on to stay lowered, to avoid meeting anyone's gaze, to become invisible. She woke up every day at 4:30 in the morning, when the darkness was still absolute and the March chill penetrated to the bone. The alarm was always the same: 3 sharp knocks on the door of the closet where she slept, and the harsh voice of Margaret Abbott shouting that the day wouldn't wait for lazy bones. Eleanor would get up from the thin mattress laid out on the floor, a mattress that had once been white but was now the indefinite color of time and mold, and put on the same patched grey dress she had worn for 2 years. There was no mirror in the room, no window. Nothing but a small trunk with 2 changes of clothes, a silver cross necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, and a yellowed photograph of the father she never knew. The Abbott boarding house stood on the main street of the town of Willow Creek, a 2-story building with a faded pink facade and porches with wrought iron railings. From the outside, it looked like a welcoming place. It had a front garden with rose bushes that Eleanor tended, lace curtains in the windows that Eleanor washed, and the smell of fresh bread that Eleanor baked. The boarding house had a good reputation. The guests praised the hearty food, the always clean sheets, the impeccable tidiness. What no one saw was who paid the price for such perfection. Margaret was 47 years old and had a heart that seemed made of cold stone. She was a woman still beautiful, with firm features and an erect posture, black hair beginning to grey at the temples. Widowed twice, she had survived losses that would mark anyone, but the way she dealt with the pain was to turn it into poison distilled drop by drop onto her eldest daughter. Her first husband, Joseph Abbott, had died on the day Eleanor was born, not during the birth, but a few hours later, falling from his horse while returning from the city with the doctor. The wagon tipped on a sharp turn, the horse spooked by a snake, and Joseph broke his neck. Margaret, still bleeding from childbirth, received her husband's body before she could even nurse her daughter for the first time. Something broke inside her that day, something that never mended. When she looked at Eleanor, she didn't see her daughter. She saw the reason Joseph had left that morning. She saw the culprit. A rational part of Margaret knew it was unfair. But pain is not rational. And over the years, that irrational blame turned into habit, and habit into naturalized cruelty. Margaret married again 4 years later, to a widowed merchant named Richard Campbell, who brought some money and no affection. From this marriage, Clarissa was born, the youngest daughter, who was now 14 and treated like a princess. Richard died of pneumonia when Clarissa was only 3, leaving Margaret a widow for the second time, but also leaving enough money for her to buy the boarding house and ensure their livelihood. That was when Eleanor's life definitively turned into servitude. From 12 to 19, Eleanor had no childhood, no adolescence, nothing that resembled a life. She woke before the sun and slept after the moon. She lit the wood stove, prepared coffee, baked biscuits, fried eggs, made grits, served breakfast to the guests. Then she washed the dishes, swept the entire house, dusted the furniture, beat the rugs, washed the bed linens, ironed, sewed patches, peeled potatoes, cleaned beans, seasoned meat, cooked lunch, served, washed dishes again. In the afternoon, she washed the guests' clothes, hung them on the line, tended the garden, watered the plants, cleaned the rooms, changed sheets, prepared dinner, served, washed dishes for the third time. Only then, around 10 at night, when everyone had retired, could Eleanor eat. But never fresh food, always the leftovers, the beans from the bottom of the pot that were starting to burn, the dried-out rice, the piece of meat with the most gristle that no one wanted, the stale bread. Margaret justified it by saying that good food cost money and that Eleanor needed to learn the value of things. But Clarissa, the youngest daughter, ate tender steak and drank hot cocoa. Clarissa studied at the sisters' school, wore new dresses, had porcelain dolls. Clarissa was the future. Eleanor was merely the tool that kept the house running. No one paid Eleanor, not a dime. Margaret said that a roof and food were payment enough, that a daughter didn't receive a salary for helping her mother. But Eleanor didn't help. Eleanor single-handedly sustained the entire operation of the boarding house, while Margaret merely supervised, collected payments, and distributed orders accompanied by insults. The guests at the boarding house changed constantly, teachers coming to teach for a semester, traveling salesmen, courthouse clerks, families passing through. Most didn't even notice Eleanor properly. She was just the quiet girl who poured the coffee, the shadow that changed the sheets, the invisible presence that kept everything clean. Some more attentive guests sensed something wrong. The eyes always downcast, the bruises on her arms, the excessive thinness, but no one interfered. Those were different times. What happened between mother and daughter was considered a family matter. Eleanor had learned not to complain. The few times she tried, when she was still a child, she was punished with a violence that taught silence. Once, at 13, she asked to go to the church social. She received a slap so hard her ear rang for 3 days. Another time, she asked if she could study at night, at least learn to read better. Margaret locked her in the closet without food for 2 days, saying that a stupid girl didn't need books, she needed work. Eleanor learned. She learned that surviving meant obeying, staying silent, disappearing. But even in the worst prisons, the human soul finds small ways to resist. Eleanor kept small secret treasures, a flower that bloomed too beautifully not to be appreciated, hidden inside her pocket. A piece of blue ribbon a guest had left behind, tied around her wrist under her sleeve. And mainly, an internal window no one could close. Imagination. When her hands scrubbed clothes on the washboard until they bled, Eleanor imagined she was washing fine linens for her own trousseau. When she swept the floor on her knees, she imagined sweeping her own house, small but hers. When she looked at the stars in the rare moments she could step out into the backyard before sleep, she imagined a different life. She didn't know how, she didn't know when. But something inside her, stubborn and small, like an ember hidden in ash, still believed there was something more. It was in March 1923 that everything began to change. A common Tuesday with strong sun and a cloudless sky. Eleanor was hanging sheets on the line in the backyard when she heard Margaret's voice calling from inside the house, that impatient tone that meant there was new work. She entered, drying her hands on her worn apron, and found her mother in the living room, talking to a man Eleanor had never seen. He was tall, must have been around 30-some years old, broad shoulders that filled out his beige linen suit well. Black hair combed back, skin tanned by the sun, large calloused hands that indicated manual labor despite the quality clothes. But what Eleanor noticed first, in that brief second she raised her eyes before lowering them again, was the man's expression. It wasn't hard like the merchants. It wasn't indifferent like the public servants. There was something attentive in those dark brown eyes, an observing quality that made it seem like he really saw things, saw people. Margaret introduced him as Gabriel Montgomery, a cotton farmer from the Valdosta region who was in town for 3 weeks for business related to buying land. He needed a comfortable room and quality food, he said in a deep, calm voice. Margaret, displaying the commercial smile she reserved for important customers, guaranteed that the Abbott boarding house offered exactly that. Then she turned to Eleanor and ordered her to prepare the front room, the best in the house, with linen sheets and fresh towels. Eleanor gave a small curtsy and left quickly. As she climbed the stairs carrying clean linens, she felt something strange. A sensation of being watched, but not in the uncomfortable way she was used to when some men passed through the boarding house. It was different. She turned instinctively and saw that Gabriel was at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, and when their eyes met for a fraction of a second, he didn't look away immediately. He just gave a slight nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, of courtesy. Eleanor felt her face heat up and ran to the room, her heart beating faster without understanding why. She prepared the room with the care she dedicated to everything, sheets pulled tight without a single wrinkle, pillows fluffy and well-beaten, towels folded perfectly on the stand, a pitcher of fresh water and a clean glass on the bedside table, a small vase with roses from the garden on the dresser. When she finished, she stood for a moment in the middle of the room, looking around, feeling something she rarely felt, satisfaction for a job well done. Not because Margaret would praise her, she never praised, but because there was self-pride in doing things right, even when no one recognized it. Gabriel settled in that same afternoon. Eleanor saw him briefly when he came up with his leather suitcase. He greeted her politely, called her Miss Eleanor, as if she were a person of respect and not just the invisible maid. That word, Miss, echoed in her head for the rest of the day. It had been years since anyone had treated her with any kind of deference. In the first few days, Gabriel seemed busy. He left early in the morning, wearing a light suit and a Panama hat, returned in the late afternoon with a briefcase full of documents. He ate breakfast with the other guests, but Eleanor noticed he ate slowly, observing everything around him with that characteristic attentiveness. She served coffee, biscuits, fruit, scrambled eggs, trying to be even more invisible than usual, but she often felt his gaze resting on her, not intrusively, but curiously, as if he were trying to understand something. It was on the 4th day that the first incident Gabriel witnessed occurred. Eleanor was serving coffee when she tripped slightly on a misaligned rug. The cup she was carrying on the tray tilted. A few drops of coffee fell onto the tablecloth, nothing serious. But Margaret, who supervised breakfast with hawk eyes, exploded immediately. Her voice cut the air like a whip. "Useless!" she shouted, "always ruining everything, always acting shameful." Eleanor murmured apologies while trying to clean up quickly, but Margaret lunged and grabbed her daughter's arm with force, nails digging into the skin, shaking her violently while continuing the stream of insults. Eleanor didn't react. She was used to it. She just kept her eyes down and waited for it to pass. But Gabriel, sitting at the head of the table, set his fork down slowly and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Mrs. Abbott, it was just a small accident," he said. "The girl is already cleaning it up. There is no reason for such a scene." Margaret let go of Eleanor's arm immediately, recomposing the mask of the cordial hostess, laughing artificially and saying she needed to be firm, or the girl wouldn't learn. Gabriel didn't reply, just held Margaret's gaze for a long moment before returning to his breakfast, but his expression had changed. There was something harder there, something that evaluated and judged silently. Eleanor fled to the kitchen as soon as she could, her heart racing. No one had ever spoken in her defense. Never. She held the edge of the stove and took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in her hands. She didn't know if it was relief or fear of the consequences. She knew her mother. There would be a price, and there was. That night, after all the guests had retired, Margaret entered Eleanor's closet without knocking. "You're putting on a show for the guest," she accused with a sibilant voice of contained rage. "Thinking you can play the victim to get attention." Eleanor tried to deny it, but was interrupted by a slap that hit the side of her face and made her ear ring. "I don't want to see you talking to him," Margaret hissed. "You do your work and disappear. If I catch you getting any wrong ideas, you'll discover what real punishment is." And she left, slamming the door. Eleanor lay on the thin mattress, feeling her face throb and the tears finally flowing. She cried in silence as she had learned to do, biting the sheet to stifle the sobs. She was 19, and her entire life was that windowless closet, that endless work, that incurable pain. There was no way out. There was no hope. Or at least, that was what she thought that night in March, while the crescent moon illuminated a world she couldn't see through the walls that imprisoned her. But Gabriel Montgomery was not a man to leave things be. He had seen a lot in his 32 years. He grew up on a farm, worked hard alongside his father since he was a boy, inherited the land at 25 when his father died of yellow fever, prospered with cotton, married at 29 a sweet girl from the neighboring town, and lost her just a year later when typhoid fever swept through the region, taking lives indiscriminately. He was left a widower, alone in a house too big, buried in work so as not to think about the pain. He learned to read people because a farmer needs to know character to hire foremen, negotiate with buyers, deal with tenants. And reading Eleanor, he saw something that disturbed him deeply. He saw a young woman who moved like a shadow. He saw hands too battered for her age. He saw thinness that wasn't natural but the product of hunger. He saw bruises hidden under long sleeves. And he saw, mainly, that constant downward gaze, that posture of someone expecting a blow at any moment. He knew that look. He had seen it in mistreated animals. He had seen it in workers who came from cruel farms. It was the look of someone who had been broken. In the following days, Gabriel began to observe more closely. He noticed that Eleanor woke up before everyone else, because he could already hear movement in the kitchen when he came down at 6 in the morning. He noticed she worked non-stop all day, that she never sat down, never rested. He noticed that at mealtimes she didn't eat with the guests, and when he casually asked where the girl took her meals, Margaret replied that her daughter ate in the kitchen later, as was appropriate for those who worked in the house. But Gabriel, who suffered from insomnia and sometimes wandered the house at night, once saw Eleanor in the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night eating cold beans straight from the pot with a piece of hard bread alone, swallowing quickly like someone afraid of being caught. On Sunday, when the boarding house was emptier because the guests went out for church and outings, Gabriel stayed. He sat on the porch with the newspaper but wasn't reading. He was watching. He saw Eleanor washing clothes in the wash tub in the backyard, scrubbing with force, back curved, arms repeating the mechanical movement for hours. The March sun was strong, must have been near 90 degrees, and the girl didn't stop even to drink water. When she finally finished hanging everything on the line, she stumbled slightly, held the line so as not to fall, stood still for a few seconds, breathing with difficulty. Then she went inside as if nothing had happened. Gabriel felt something tighten in his chest. He knew hard work, he wasn't against it, but that wasn't work. It was exploitation, it was cruelty. And worst of all, it was mother against daughter, which was a type of violence he considered among the lowest. He decided to act, but knew he needed to be careful. He couldn't just confront Margaret directly without justified cause. He couldn't interfere in a family matter without an invitation. But he could observe more, document mentally, and wait for the right moment. The moment arrived on a rainy Thursday. The afternoon was grey and cold, thick rain drumming on the roof and turning the streets into a mud pit. Gabriel returned from business earlier than usual, soaked despite his raincoat, went up to change. When he came back down, he passed the kitchen and heard raised voices. He stopped without being seen. The door was ajar. He knew it was wrong to eavesdrop, but something in the tone of the voices made him stay. Margaret was furious. One of the guests had complained that the sheet was still damp, she said in a cutting voice. Eleanor tried to explain that with the rain, it was impossible to dry everything completely, that she had ironed it hot to get out whatever moisture she could, but Margaret didn't want explanations. "You are incompetent," she spat. "Useless as always. You're not even good enough to do properly the only thing you're fit for." The sound of the slap was loud, followed by the noise of something falling. Gabriel entered the kitchen before thinking clearly about what he was doing. Eleanor was on the floor, where she had fallen after the shove that followed the slap. She was holding her face. Margaret stood over her, hand raised to strike again. When she saw Gabriel, she froze, her expression shifting rapidly from rage to surprise, and then to that rehearsed social mask. "Mr. Montgomery, excuse me, I was just correcting," she began to say, but he interrupted her. His voice was low, but carried the weight of authority, used to being obeyed. "That isn't correction," he said. "That is brutality." He helped Eleanor up, noticing the split lip bleeding, the beginning of a bruise on her face, the uncontrollable trembling of her body. The girl tried to pull away, murmured that everything was fine, that it was her fault, but Gabriel didn't let go of the arm he held to help her stand. He looked at Margaret and said with a clarity that left no doubts, "I would like to speak with you in private, when possible. It is about a business matter that may be of interest to you." Margaret, confused but always interested in business, agreed. Gabriel released Eleanor gently and left the kitchen, but before leaving he turned and looked at her again, and this time the look said things he couldn't yet say aloud. Eleanor stood in the middle of the kitchen, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst out of her chest, the taste of blood in her mouth, and something new, something she hadn't felt in years, starting to grow like a fragile seedling, forcing its way through compacted earth, the most dangerous of all emotions, the most painful of all possibilities. Hope. Gabriel asked to speak with Margaret that same night after dinner, in the small room she used as an office. Eleanor didn't participate in the conversation, but heard her mother go up the stairs an hour later with heavy steps and a disgruntled expression, something between indignation and financial calculation. She said nothing to her daughter, just locked herself in her room. Eleanor spent the entire night awake in her windowless closet, imagining what had been said, feeling fear and that dangerous hope growing in equal parts. The next morning, Friday, Margaret called her into the office before breakfast. Eleanor entered with her heart jumping, hands sweating, expecting punishment for the scene Gabriel had witnessed. But what came was completely unexpected. Margaret sat behind the desk, hands clasped over the dark wood, expression hard but controlled. "Mr. Montgomery made a proposal," she said without preamble. "He wants to take you to work on his farm. Says he needs someone to take care of the big house, that the current cook is too old for the heavy work, offered wages, room, and board." Eleanor went completely still. The words seemed to be in a foreign language, needed to be translated, rearranged to make sense. Work on a farm, leave the boarding house, wages. She couldn't form an answer. Margaret continued, her voice loaded with that hardness Eleanor knew so well. "I told him you are needed here, that I can't be without help. But he offered compensation, said he can pay for your services for 6 months in advance, enough for me to hire someone else. Eleanor felt dizzy. 6 months of wages. How much was her 7 years of work worth? But she said nothing, just waited. Margaret drummed her fingers on the table, a gesture indicating suppressed irritation. I am not obliged to accept, she continued, but the man is a rich farmer, has influence in the region. It's not good to create enmity with people like that. She paused, and Eleanor saw something pass over her mother's face, something that might have been regret or just deeper calculation. You will decide, she said finally. If you want to go, go. But if you go, don't come back whining when you discover the world out there isn't the paradise you imagine. Eleanor stood there, processing. For the first time in her life, she was being offered a choice. No, it wasn't quite a choice. It was a door ajar, maybe a trap, maybe a miracle, but it was something. The answer came before she could think too much. I accept, she whispered, and then repeated more firmly. I accept going to work for Mr. Montgomery. Margaret nodded dryly. He said he wants to leave tomorrow morning early before 6. He'll take you in his wagon along with the luggage. Pack your things today. And Eleanor, she added, as her daughter turned to leave, for the first time using a tone that was perhaps the closest to concern she could express. Be careful. A man who offers help always wants something in return. Eleanor left the office with trembling legs. She went up to the closet, closed the door, and only then allowed reality to hit her. She was leaving. She was getting out of that house. She was going to work on a farm where she would receive a wage, where she would have her own room, where she wouldn't be beaten. She sat on the thin mattress and covered her face with her hands, but she didn't cry. She was beyond tears. She was in a place between absolute terror and unbelievable joy. She spent the day working as always, but every task had a different flavor. It would be the last time smoothing those sheets, the last time sweeping that floor, the last time serving at that table. Gabriel appeared for lunch, and when Eleanor served his food, he looked into her eyes and asked quietly if everything was settled. She nodded, and for the first time in years, almost smiled. At night, she packed her things. She had almost nothing. 2 changes of clothes, her grandmother's cross, the yellowed photograph of her father, the blue ribbon she kept as a treasure. Everything fit in a small bundle made from an old sheet. She lay down for the last time on the thin mattress in the windowless closet, but this time she couldn't sleep. She stared into the complete darkness, listening to the sounds of the house, memorizing what would soon be just a memory. On Saturday morning, she woke before 4, as always, but this time she wasn't woken by pounding on the door. She woke on her own, by her own will, because it was the last day. She put on the patched grey dress, pinned up her hair, picked up her bundle. She went down the stairs for the last time, while the house still slept. Gabriel was already waiting in the foyer, with his leather suitcase and a serene expression. Margaret appeared in a robe, hair loose, looking older without the social armor she wore during the day. She looked at Eleanor for a long moment, and the daughter waited, perhaps for a word, perhaps for a goodbye, perhaps for some sign that those 19 years had meant something. But Margaret just told Gabriel she hoped he would honor the agreed payment, and when he confirmed, the money would be deposited into her account at the bank that same morning. She nodded and went back to her room without looking at Eleanor again. That was how Eleanor Abbott left the only home she knew, without a hug, without a goodbye, without anything but a small bundle and a heart huge with fear and hope. Gabriel's wagon was parked in front of the boarding house, pulled by 2 robust, well-groomed bay horses. He helped Eleanor up, a simple gesture but one she wasn't used to, someone offering a hand, someone taking care. She sat on the wooden bench while he stowed the luggage in the back. The sun hadn't risen completely yet. The sky was that blue-grey colour of dawn. The air was crisp and smelled of wet earth from the previous night's rain. Gabriel climbed onto the wagon, took the reins, and with a click of his tongue set the horses in motion. Eleanor didn't look back. She didn't want to. She kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, hands clutched over the bundle in her lap, her whole body tense as a violin string tuned too tight. They travelled in silence for the first few miles. The town of Willow Creek fell behind, and the landscape changed to dirt roads flanked by pasture cotton fields, patches of preserved woods. The sun rose completely golden and strong, promising a hot day. The sway of the wagon was rhythmic, the sounds of wheels on dirt and horses' hooves creating a monotonous and strangely comforting melody. It was Gabriel who broke the silence first. "Eleanor," he said, keeping his eyes on the road, "I want you to understand something. You won't be a prisoner on my farm. You will work, yes, because work gives dignity, and I don't believe in charity that humiliates. But you will receive fair pay, you will have time off, you will have respect, and if at any moment you want to leave, you can. The doors aren't locked." Eleanor turned her face to him, surprised. "Why are you doing this, sir?" she asked with a voice hoarse from speaking little in her life. "You don't even know me," Gabriel thought before answering. He held the reins with one hand and with the other took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she would come to know as a sign he was choosing his words carefully. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said finally. "Typhoid fever. She was a good person, kind to everyone, especially the farm workers. She always said a man's character is measured by how he treats those who can't defend themselves. Since she's been gone, I try to live in a way she would approve of. And when I saw your mother treating you that way, I knew she wouldn't approve of me standing by with my arms crossed." Eleanor sat in silence, processing. It wasn't love, it wasn't attraction, it wasn't anything romantic, it was principle. It was human decency. In a way that was more comfortable. It didn't create emotional debt. It didn't create dangerous expectations. "Thank you," she whispered, and couldn't say anything else because her throat had closed with held-back emotion. The journey lasted 4 hours. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat bread and cheese Gabriel had brought in a basket. He offered it to Eleanor first, and when she took only a small piece, he insisted she eat more, said the trip was long and she needed energy. She obeyed, and the food was so good, fresh soft bread, flavorful cured cheese, that she had to hold back the urge to swallow it all at once, like a starving animal. "Here, help yourself properly if you want. Leave a little for the lean years, but enjoy today too. If you're not careful, soon you'll be doing like before, forgetting about yourself." Eleanor looked at him surprised, and this time he was smiling, a small but genuine smile that lit up his face and made laugh lines appear at the corners of his eyes. She felt something strange in her stomach, something that wasn't hunger but was similar, an emptiness that wanted to be filled but didn't quite know with what. They resumed the journey. The sun was high when they finally arrived at Golden Hope Farm. Eleanor first saw the cotton fields stretching in green waves over the gentle hills, organized rows as far as the eye could see. Then she saw the big house, a sprawling single-story structure painted white, with a red shingle roof and a wide porch with columns. It had a front garden with colorful flowers, fruit trees, a stone path leading to the main entrance. It was beautiful. It was more than that. It was welcoming. Gabriel stopped the wagon near the side porch. He helped Eleanor down, took her bundle and his suitcase, and led her inside. The house had wide waxed floorboards, light walls, dark solid wood furniture. It smelled of coffee, beeswax, fresh flowers. Light poured in through large windows, white cotton curtains moving with the breeze. It was so different from the windowless closet that Eleanor stood still in the middle of the living room, trying to absorb it all. An elderly woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a flowered apron. She had completely white hair in a loose bun, a wrinkled face but a sweet expression, blue eyes still lively despite her age. "Mrs. Higgins," said Gabriel with evident affection in his voice, "this is Eleanor. She's going to work here with us starting today." Mrs. Higgins broke into a wide smile that transformed her whole face. "Welcome, child," she said warmly. "Thank God help has arrived. These old bones can't handle everything alone anymore." She approached and took Eleanor's hands in hers, soft, warm hands that squeezed gently. "You look tired. Come, I'll show you your room." Eleanor followed, still in a state of shock. Mrs. Higgins led her down a hallway to a door at the back of the house. She opened it, and Eleanor entered a small but complete room. It had a real bed with a thick mattress and a colourful quilt. It had a window with a curtain, a real window that looked out to the backyard and let in sunlight. It had a wooden dresser with a mirror, a hook to hang clothes, a rug on the floor. It was more than she had had in her entire life. "It's small," Mrs. Higgins said almost apologetically, "but it's all yours. You can arrange it how you like. Later I'll show you the rest of the house and explain the work, but first rest a bit, freshen up, then come have lunch with us." Eleanor was left alone in the room. She put her bundle on the bed and sat beside it. She looked out the window and saw chickens scratching in the yard, saw the blue sky without obstacles, saw trees swaying in the wind. For the first time in 7 years, she cried tears that weren't of pain. They were of relief so deep it felt like pain, but wasn't. It was liberation. She washed her face in the basin with clean water on the dresser, changed her dress, putting on the other set of clothes she owned, pinned up her hair again, and left the room with hesitant steps. She found the kitchen by following the smell of food. It was a large kitchen with a wood stove, a sturdy wooden table in the center, shelves full of clay and copper pots, ropes of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. Mrs. Higgins was finishing preparing lunch. Fluffy rice, seasoned beans, roast beef, biscuits, tomato and onion salad, sautéed greens. The table was set with 3 places. Eleanor was confused. 3 places. She was going to eat at the table, with them. Gabriel entered drying his hands. He had changed from his travel clothes to simpler work clothes, denim trousers and a cotton shirt, with sleeves rolled up showing muscular forearms. "Sit, Eleanor," he said, pointing to a chair. "Here we eat together. None of that separating those who work from those who give orders. We are few, and we eat at the same table." Eleanor sat slowly, still expecting it to be a joke, that someone would shout she didn't have permission. But no one shouted. Mrs. Higgins served the plates generously, placed hot, fragrant food in front of her, and then sat down too. Gabriel said a brief prayer thanking for the food and the new help arriving, and then began to eat. Eleanor picked up her fork, brought food to her mouth, and the flavor exploded. It was seasoned perfectly, it was hot, it was fresh. She chewed slowly, trying not to look desperate, but she was starving for real food, starving from years of cold leftovers. "Eat up, child," said Mrs. Higgins with that motherly voice. "You are too thin. Need to gain weight, recover your health. No one goes hungry here." And that was how Eleanor had her first meal as a free person. Sitting at a table with people who didn't hate her, eating hot, abundant food, being treated like a human being. It was so surreal that part of her expected to wake up and discover it was a cruel dream. After lunch, Mrs. Higgins showed her the whole house. She explained the routine: wake up at 5 in the morning. Mrs. Higgins prepared breakfast while Eleanor lit the fire and organized the kitchen. Breakfast served at 6. Then house cleaning, but it was a small house by farm standards. Only Gabriel lived there with Mrs. Higgins, who had a room in the back. Laundry twice a week, lunch at noon. In the afternoon, varied tasks: sewing, mending, canning, tending the chicken coop and garden. Dinner at 7. Free after 8 at night. Sundays off after lunch. Eleanor listened, trying to absorb. Time off. Sundays, half free. 8 hours of sleep guaranteed. It seemed like a king's luxury. The first few days were an adjustment. Eleanor worked with intense dedication, still expecting punishment for any small error, still flinching when someone approached too fast. But punishment never came. When she broke a plate on the third day, she stood paralyzed with fear. Mrs. Higgins just said to be careful with the shards so as not to cut herself, and that a plate can be replaced, but a cut finger takes time to heal. Gabrielle worked in the cotton fields during the day, came back in the late afternoon, covered in red dust and sweat, washed up at the pump in the yard, and appeared for dinner with hair still damp and a clean shirt. Eleanor noticed, even trying not to. She noticed how he treated everyone with respect, from Mrs. Higgins to the boy who helped with the horses. She noticed how attentive his eyes were, how he really listened when people spoke. She noticed the way his hands held the silverware, large but careful. She noticed and scolded herself internally for noticing. "Girl, don't be a fool. You barely got free of your mother and you're already concocting another dangerous illusion. This man saved you out of decency, not because he's interested in you." It was in the second week that the first moment of real connection happened. Eleanor was in the backyard hanging clothes on the line. It was late afternoon and the sun was low, creating that golden light that makes everything look painted. Gabriel was returning from the fields and stopped when he saw her, stood watching for a few seconds. Eleanor felt the gaze and turned. "Do you like it here?" he asked bluntly. Eleanor nodded. "More than I can explain," she answered honestly. Gabriel approached, took one of the towels from the basket and helped hang it, a gesture that surprised her. A farmer helping with laundry on the line. "Mrs. Higgins told me you wake up before 5 every day," he commented while pinning the towel. "You don't need to. Here the work is shared. It's not a prison." "I know," Eleanor said quietly. "But I can't sleep more than that. I lie awake waiting for someone to bang on the door, waiting for screaming." But she paused, surprised by her own honesty. "I think it will take a while for me to get used to it." Gabriel stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "It will take time," he said with a gentle voice. "A deep wound doesn't heal fast, but it heals, Eleanor. You'll see." Her name in his voice sounded different. It didn't have contempt, it didn't have anger, it didn't have impatience. It had something warm, something that made her heart beat faster. She looked away quickly and grabbed another piece of clothing to hang, needing to do something with her hands. They finished hanging the laundry in comfortable silence. When the last piece was on the line, Gabriel asked if she knew how to read. Eleanor admitted she knew only the basics, having learned a little before having to abandon school at 12. He nodded thoughtfully. "If you want, I can teach you more," he offered. "I have books, not many but some. And reading is good, it opens the world." Eleanor felt that strange warmth in her chest again. "I would like that," she said in a low voice. "I would like that very much." And so it began. After dinner, when the work was done, Gabriel brought a book to the porch. They sat in rocking chairs under the light of the kerosene lamp, and he read aloud while Eleanor listened, mesmerized. They were stories of other places, other lives, other possibilities. They were windows to worlds she never imagined existed. Sometimes he stopped and explained difficult words, asked if she had understood. His voice was deep and calm, had a rhythm that soothed her nerves, that kept the nightmares away. "You two there look like a courting couple," Mrs. Higgins joked one night, passing the porch with a sewing basket. Both looked embarrassed. Gabriel cleared his throat and said he was just teaching the girl to read better. Mrs. Higgins smiled that way wise old women smile when they know things the young haven't discovered yet, and went inside without commenting further. That small observation changed something. It brought to the surface what both were trying to ignore. There was chemistry, there was attraction. There was something growing there that wasn't just gratitude on one side and compassion on the other. In the following weeks, the moments multiplied. Gabriel teaching Eleanor to ride a horse, his hands holding her waist to help her into the saddle, both too conscious of the touch. Eleanor taking fresh water to the cotton field, where Gabriel worked under the strong sun, their fingers touching when he took the cup, eyes meeting for seconds too long. Dinners where conversations extended, where they laughed at small things, where they exchanged childhood stories, where they built intimacy brick by brick. Mrs. Higgins watched everything with satisfaction. Gabriel was lighter, less lost in the pain of widowerhood. Eleanor was blossoming, gaining weight, smiling more, walking upright instead of stooped. That house which had been too sad was coming back to life. It was in the 5th week that Gabriel plucked up the courage. They were on the porch after dinner, as had become habit. The book was closed on the small table between them. The sky was full of stars, a moonless night, the Milky Way sketched in white over infinite black. "Eleanor," Gabriel said suddenly, "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, heart racing. "I brought you here to help you," he continued, choosing words with care. "And it was true, it was just that in the beginning. But in the last few weeks, I discovered you are much more than someone who needs help. You are an incredible person. Strong, intelligent, kind, despite everything you suffered. And I—" He paused, took a deep breath. "I'm feeling things I haven't felt in years. I don't want to pressure you. You just got out of a terrible situation. You need time to find yourself. But I also can't pretend I don't feel it." Eleanor was breathless. She had dreamed of this, of course she had, but never believed it would be real. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I don't know if it's gratitude, if it's confusion, but when you are near, my heart beats differently. When you smile, the whole day gets better. I don't know what to do with this." Gabriel extended his hand over the small table, palm up, an invitation. "You don't need to do anything yet," he said softly. "I just needed you to know. We can go slow. We can see what happens." Eleanor looked at his hand, then at his eyes, and placed her hand over his. His fingers closed around hers, large and warm and careful, and they stayed like that, hands intertwined under the stars, in a silence full of promises that couldn't yet be spoken aloud. It was May, when the peace was broken. Eleanor was in the vegetable garden picking tomatoes on a Saturday morning when she heard raised voices coming from the front of the house. She recognized one of them immediately, and the blood froze in her veins. She dropped the basket and ran to the front porch. Margaret was there, stepping down from a rented carriage, dressed in traveling clothes and looking furious. Clarissa was with her, her 14-year-old half-sister looking uncomfortable. Gabriel was on the porch, blocking the entrance, arms crossed and expression closed. "I already said, Mrs. Abbott," he spoke with a hard voice, "Eleanor is here of her own free will. She has an employment contract. She receives wages. There is nothing illegal. She is my daughter," shouted Margaret, and a last trace of desperation surfaced in her voice. A daughter who abandoned her mother without even saying a proper goodbye. A daughter who ran away following a man who God knows what he promised. "I came to get her, and I'm going to take her back, even if I have to call the sheriff." Eleanor appeared on the porch, legs trembling but voice firm. "I'm not going back," she said loud and clear. Margaret turned to her, eyes blazing. "You think you can just leave? After everything I did for you? I raised you, gave you a roof, gave you food. Use me as a slave," interrupted Eleanor, and the words came out with a strength she didn't know she had. "Beat me. Humiliated me, treated me worse than a dog, and now you come talking about everything you did for me?" Margaret went white, then red. She raised her hand as if to strike, an automatic reflex, but Gabriel stepped forward, placing himself between the two. "No," he said with a low, dangerous voice. "You will never touch her again." The silence that followed was tense as an overstretched bowstring. Clarissa whimpered softly, frightened by the tension. Margaret lowered her hand, trembling with rage, and said with a sibilant voice, "This won't stay like this. I'm going to the sheriff. I'm going to the priest. I'm going to make everyone know you seduced my daughter, that she's living here without marriage, that she's staining the family name." "Go," said Gabriel calmly. "Go to the sheriff, and I'll show the contract documents. Go to the priest, and I'll talk about the years of abuse that witnesses in town can confirm. Do what you want, Mrs. Abbott, but Eleanor is not going back to that house, not while I'm alive." Margaret looked from Gabriel to Eleanor, saw the determination in both, and understood she had lost. She turned abruptly, went back to the carriage, pulling Clarissa by the arm, and before getting in said loudly for everyone to hear, "You are dead to me, Eleanor, dead. You have no mother anymore. You have no family anymore. You'll see what it is to be alone in the world when this man gets tired of you." The carriage left, kicking up dust. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching it recede, and felt something too complex to name. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was a door closing, a cord cutting, the end of an era. Gabriel put his hand on her shoulder, a silent anchor. "You have family now," said Mrs. Higgins, appearing with a glass of water. "You have us, and real family isn't who shares blood, it's who shares life." Eleanor drank the water, sat in the rocking chair that had become hers, and let Gabriel hold her hand while the sun climbed in the sky and a new chapter of life began, written not in violence and pain, but in choices and courage. The days following Margaret's visit were strange for Eleanor. It was as if a rope that had tethered her for her entire life had been cut, and she was in free fall, unsure if she would hit the ground or discover she could fly. She woke up in the middle of the night with her heart racing, certain she was back in the windowless closet, certain it had all been a cruel dream. But then she opened her eyes and saw the moonlight coming through the window, felt the soft mattress underneath, heard the crickets singing outside, and reality returned. She was free. She was safe. She was truly alive for the first time. Gabriel noticed. Of course he noticed. He had that way of observing that didn't intrude, but saw everything. On a particularly difficult morning, when Eleanor broke a glass at breakfast and stood frozen awaiting a punishment that wouldn't come, he got up slowly, took the broom, and began sweeping up the shards with her. He didn't say anything about the glass. Instead, he told a story about when he was a boy and broke his mother's favorite plate, the only one she had brought from her family home, and how terrified he was expecting punishment. But his mother just sighed, hugged him, and said, "Porcelain breaks, but a son can't be fixed if treated with anger." His voice was low and calm, and Eleanor understood what he was doing, reminding her there were other ways to live, other ways to react to small human errors. Mrs. Higgins also had her methods. She taught Eleanor to cook more elaborate dishes, not just simple food, but recipes with secrets, special spices, tricks only years of experience teach. "See, child," she would say, while showing the right consistency for caramel, "this here is knowledge passed from woman to woman. My grandmother taught me, I teach you, you'll teach your daughters one day." It was her way of saying, you have a future, you have continuity, you don't end in the pain you lived. Weeks passed, and May turned to June, then July. Winter arrived in the countryside, bringing frosty mornings covering the fields in white, starry nights that invited staying close to the wood stove. The farm routine changed with the seasons. It was planting time, and the property bustled with activity. Eleanor helped Mrs. Higgins prepare food in industrial quantities, huge pots of stew, cauldrons of soup, large roasts that fed the extra hands. It was during this time that Eleanor discovered something about herself. She liked taking care of people. She liked seeing the workers eat with appetite, liked hearing the compliments on the seasoning, liked knowing her work sustained and nourished people. It was so different from serving at the boarding house, where every plate placed on the table was accompanied by fear. Here it was accompanied by purpose. Gabriel worked long hours, leaving before sunrise and returning after dark, exhausted but satisfied. One night, sitting at the dinner table massaging his temples, he commented that if the crops sold well, he could finally renovate the east wing of the house, the part that had been closed since his wife's death. Eleanor served chamomile tea for his headache and asked why he had closed that wing. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, turning the cup in his hands. "It was the room we were going to prepare for the baby," he said finally, voice low and heavy with old weight. "Anna, my wife, was pregnant when she caught the fever. We lost both. The baby first, then her. I closed those rooms because I couldn't look at them. But it's been over 2 years. Maybe it's time to open them again. Let life back in." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. She placed her hand over his on the table, a small but significant gesture. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said with deep sincerity. "But I think she would want you to open those rooms, to fill the house with life again." Gabriel turned his hand under hers, interlaced their fingers, and smiled a sad but hopeful smile. "I think you're right," he agreed. "And I think you helped me reach that conclusion." It was that night the kiss happened. Eleanor had gotten up to take the empty cup to the kitchen, passed near Gabriel, and he held her hand gently, making her stop. He looked into her eyes, those honey eyes that didn't hide anymore, that had learned to sustain gazes. "May I?" he asked in a low voice, and she understood what he was asking even without specifics. She nodded, just a small head movement, and he stood up, brought his face close slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted, but she didn't want to. When his lips touched hers, it was like a spark lighting a fuse. It was a gentle kiss, careful, but loaded with everything they hadn't said aloud. When they separated, both were breathing differently, and Eleanor felt she had just crossed another border, had just discovered another thing about herself. She was capable of desire, capable of wanting, capable of loving. They didn't talk about the kiss immediately. They didn't need to. There was a silent understanding that they were building something, but it needed to be built right, brick by brick, without rushing that could make it crumble. But the kisses repeated. Stolen in the pantry when no one was looking, given on the porch under the stars after Mrs. Higgins retired. Always gentle, always respectful, always accompanied by that chemistry that made the air thicker and heartbeats faster. "Get married already," said Mrs. Higgins one morning out of the blue, while she and Eleanor were kneading dough. "You think I'm blind? I see those looks, those silly smiles. And look, I'm not criticizing. I'm rooting for you. But do it right. A house needs a real mistress, not a maid the boss kisses in secret." Eleanor turned red to the roots of her hair. "Mrs. Higgins, we aren't—" She started to protest, but the old lady raised a hand, interrupting. "Don't come to me with stories, child. I have eyes. And Gabriel hasn't looked at a woman like that since Anna died. You brought him back to life. Now do it right. And between you and me, he's waiting for the right moment to ask. Just lacks courage." A day, when Gabriel appeared for breakfast half an hour later, Eleanor couldn't look at him without blushing. He noticed, frowned, confused, and Mrs. Higgins just laughed in that conspiratorial way of hers. It was August when Gabriel made the decision. A month of clear skies, cold nights, a huge full moon illuminating the fields as if it were day. He planned everything carefully. On a Friday after dinner, he asked Eleanor to take a walk with him. They put on heavy coats because the cold cut deep, and walked the paths between the fields, the moon so bright it cast sharp shadows on the ground. Gabriel was nervous, Eleanor noticed. He had that way of running his hand through his hair repeatedly, of starting to speak and interrupting his own sentence. Finally, they stopped in the middle of a field, on a high point from where the house could be seen in the distance, yellow light from the windows looking like a warm invitation against the cold night. "Eleanor," he began, and this time his voice came out firm. I'll speak straight because I'm not a man for beating around the bush. You arrived here 5 months ago. I brought you thinking to help someone in a bad situation, but you became much more than that. You became the best part of my days. You became the reason I wake up happy. You became the person with whom I want to share the future." He paused, took a deep breath, and took her hands in his. "I know you are still healing. I know you are discovering who you are away from your mother, but I also know what I feel, and I feel I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy if you'll let me. So I ask you, Eleanor Abbott, will you marry me?" The world stopped. The moon, the stars, the wind, everything froze, awaiting the answer. Eleanor looked at that man who had saved her life, not just by taking her from the boarding house, but by showing her there was goodness in the world, there was kindness, there was love that didn't hurt. Tears came, but they were good tears, tears of happiness so intense it didn't fit inside her chest. "Yes," she whispered first, then repeated louder, "Yes, Gabriel. Yes, I accept." He pulled her into a tight hug, lifted her off the ground and spun her, laughing like a boy. And when he put her back down, he planted a kiss on her that wasn't gentle or careful. It was urgent and full of promise for the future. When they separated, both were laughing and crying at the same time, and the moon witnessed that moment that would change both lives forever. "Took you long enough," was all Mrs. Higgins said when they returned, holding hands, and announced the engagement. "I was thinking of giving a push." But she hugged both tightly, and her eyes shone damp with genuine joy. "Now let me tell you something important. Here in the country we value simplicity, but a wedding needs to be done right. If you ask me how to throw a beautiful wedding without extravagance, I can teach you. But if you ask me what really matters in a wedding, I say it's two people promising in front of God and witnesses they will choose each other every day, on good days and bad. And you've already proven you know how to do that." They set the wedding for October, 2 months later, enough time to prepare the house, make some adjustments, and for Eleanor to sew her own dress with Mrs. Higgins's help. They wanted a simple ceremony in the farm chapel, a small and beautiful building on a rise overlooking the fields. They would invite the farm workers, some neighbors, the town preacher. It wasn't going to be a big party, but it was going to be a true one. The preparations took the following weeks. Gabriel renovated the east wing as promised, opening the closed rooms, painting walls, installing new furniture. Eleanor worked on the dress in her spare time, simple white fabric, but well cut, with discreet lace at the neckline and sleeves. Mrs. Higgins made traditional sweets for the party, fudge, cookies, pies. The whole house vibrated with that good energy of new beginnings. It was in September that Clarissa appeared. Eleanor was in the garden picking flowers to dry when she saw the girl walking up the road, alone, carrying a small bundle. She had grown in the last months, was taller, thinner, and when she got close, Eleanor saw fresh tear tracks on her face. Clarissa stopped a few yards away, unsure. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, with a trembling voice. Eleanor hesitated. Childhood memories where Clarissa was the favored daughter while she was beaten coming back in waves. But then she nodded and pointed to the bench under the oak tree. They sat side by side, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I came to apologize," Clarissa said finally, words coming out in a fast rush, as if she needed to speak before losing courage. "I know I was horrible to you. I saw her beating you and never did anything. I ate while you starved. I studied while you worked. And I thought it was normal that that's how things were. But after you left, Mother..." She stopped, swallowed hard. "She started treating me differently, not as bad as she treated you, but I saw things. I saw her anger, saw it was never about what you did or didn't do. It was something in her, something broken. And I realized you suffered your whole life for nothing, just because our mother is sick with hate." Eleanor sat in silence, processing. Part of her wanted to scream, wanted to throw all the years of injustice in her half-sister's face. But another part, the part that had grown and matured these months, understood Clarissa was a child, that a child learns what they see, that she was also a victim in her own way. "Why did you come here?" Eleanor asked carefully. Clarissa looked at her own hands. "Mother is worse. Drinking a lot, making bad business deals. The boarding house is falling apart, and she's always talking about you, sometimes with anger, sometimes crying, saying she lost both daughters. Because I'm leaving too." She paused, took a deep breath. "I got a job as an assistant teacher at a school in Valdosta. I'm going to support myself. But before going, I needed to ask your forgiveness. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I'm sorry and that I admire your courage for leaving." Eleanor watched her sister, saw sincerity there, saw regret, and felt something change inside her. Forgiveness wasn't about saying everything was fine, because it wasn't. It was about letting go of the weight, about not carrying poison that only poisons the carrier. "I forgive you, Clarissa," she said slowly, "and I wish you happiness in your new life. But I can't have a relationship with you right now, maybe in the future. But right now it still hurts too much." Clarissa nodded, tears flowing silently. "I understand," she whispered, "and I'm happy you're okay. Really happy." She stood to leave, but before going turned and said one last thing. "You're getting married, right? I heard in town. I hope he makes you happy. You deserve it." And she walked away down the dusty road, and Eleanor watched until she disappeared around the bend and felt one more weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't complete reconciliation, maybe never would be, but it was closure. It was being able to turn the page knowing there were no more loose ends. She told Gabriel at night, lying on the porch, looking at stars, her head resting on his shoulder. He listened to everything in silence, and when she finished, just kissed the top of her head and said he was proud of the strong and generous woman she was. And if you want to know how things unfolded from there, how this love consolidated and turned into a truly beautiful story, I'll tell you now the part that matters most. October arrived, bringing the warmth of fall, leaves turning gold and red, sky impossibly blue. The wedding day dawned perfect, with golden sun and a gentle breeze that swayed the curtains. Eleanor woke early in the room that had been hers during those months, but which was already being emptied, because after the ceremony she would move to the master bedroom, the room that would be hers and Gabriel's together. Mrs. Higgins helped her dress, pinned her brown hair in a simple but beautiful style, placed the short veil, and when Eleanor looked in the mirror, she saw a person she didn't completely recognize. The broken girl had disappeared. In her place was a whole woman, a woman who had chosen her own path, a woman who was marrying for true love. The ceremony was at the chapel at 4 in the afternoon, when the sun was starting to lower, creating that perfect light. The pews were full with farm workers and their families, neighbors from nearby properties, townspeople who had known Gabriel since he was a boy. Mrs. Higgins was in the first row, handkerchief in hand, crying those happy tears of someone witnessing a happy ending to a story that started sad. Gabriel was at the altar, and when Eleanor entered walking down the simple wooden aisle, his eyes filled. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was radiant with true happiness. When she arrived beside him, he took her hand and whispered only for her to hear, "Thank you for choosing to share your life with me." The preacher performed the traditional ceremony, spoke of enduring love, of commitment that remains, of building a life in partnership. When it came time for vows, Gabriel and Eleanor had written their own. "Eleanor," said Gabriel with a firm but emotional voice, "I promise to honor you every day. I promise to listen to you, respect you, support you in everything you want to do. I promise to remind you how strong you are when you forget. I promise to build with you a home full of love, laughter, and second chances. I promise our house will never be a prison, will always be a refuge. And I promise to love you not just on easy days, but especially on hard ones, because that's when true love is proven. Eleanor took a deep breath, tears already flowing, but her voice came out clear. Gabriel, you saved me when I didn't know I could be saved, showed me I had value when I thought I didn't, taught me love doesn't hurt, love heals. I promise to be your partner in everything, promise to build a beautiful future with you, promise to take care of you on bad days like you took care of me, promise to fill our house with joy, purpose, life. And I promise to love you with everything I am, every day I have left. Rings were exchanged, simple gold bands Gabriel had ordered in town. The preacher declared them husband and wife. Gabriel pulled Eleanor for a kiss that drew applause and whistles from the small congregation, a kiss that sealed not just legal union, but the union of souls that had found each other when both were in need. The party was simple but joyful. Long tables set up in the yard, abundant food, Mrs. Higgins and other women had prepared, fiddle music played by the workers, dancing that went until night fell and stars appeared. Eleanor danced with Gabriel under the infinite sky, the two spinning slowly to the music, laughing when they missed steps, not caring about anything else but that perfect moment. When the party ended and guests left, Gabriel picked Eleanor up, even with her protesting laughing that she was already married and didn't need formalities. He carried her to the room that was now theirs, and there they began life as a real couple, with tenderness, with passion, with everything true love carries. The years that followed were of building solid happiness. Eleanor bloomed completely. She gained weight, gained color, gained confidence, discovered she liked taking care of the workers' children, had a knack for teaching. Began teaching the tenants' daughters to read on Sunday afternoons, using the big house porch as a makeshift classroom. Gabriel supported her fully, said an educated woman raised educated children, and investing in education was investing in the future. It was in the second year of marriage that Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news brought immense joy, but also fear. Fear of repeating patterns she knew, fear of not knowing how to be a mother because she never had a good example. Gabriel held her face in his hands and said with absolute conviction, "You will be a wonderful mother, exactly because you know how not to be. You know what hurts, so you'll never do it. You know what heals, so you'll always offer it." The pregnancy was peaceful. Eleanor embroidered small clothes, prepared the cradle Gabriel had built with his own hands, daydreamed about the baby coming. When time finally came, on a January morning, Eleanor gave birth not to one, but two babies, twins. A boy and a girl, perfect and healthy, with potent lungs announcing their arrival to the world with vigorous crying. Gabriel cried, holding his children for the first time, cried with joy, but also healing, because those babies brought new life not just to the house, but to his heart that had carried pain of loss for so long. Eleanor, exhausted but radiant, held the two babies and knew with absolute certainty she was capable of infinite love, that she had inside her rivers and rivers of love that had never been allowed to flow and now flooded everything. They named the twins John, in honor of the father Eleanor never knew, but whom Gabriel said would live proud of the woman his daughter became, and Anne, in honor of Gabriel's first wife, because true love has no jealousy of past love, only honors and moves forward. Mrs. Higgins became a surrogate grandmother, spoiling the babies, singing old lullabies, passing wisdom only grandmas have. The house that had been too silent, too sad, now overflowed with children's laughter, overflowed with life in abundance. Eleanor expanded the classes she taught. They built a small hall behind the farmhouse specifically for that. She taught reading, writing, basic math, not just to girls, but to anyone who wanted to learn. Some adults began attending too, workers who never had a chance to study. Eleanor had discovered her purpose, turning pain into a bridge, using her story to show that no matter where a person is born, no matter how hard the beginning was, there is always a possibility of a new start. It was 3 years after the wedding that Eleanor did something that surprised even herself. She wrote a letter to Margaret. It wasn't exactly a reconciliation letter. It was a letter of final closure, of releasing both parties. She wrote about the life she built, the happiness she found, the grandchildren Margaret would never know unless she chose to change. She wrote that she forgave, not because what was done was right, but because carrying anger was poison and she had chosen health. She ended saying the door was ajar, but it was Margaret who needed to decide if she wanted to cross it. The answer never came. Eleanor learned through acquaintances in town that Margaret had sold the boarding house, moved to the coast, was living with a distant relative. Part of her felt sadness for a mother who never managed to heal her own wounds, but it wasn't paralyzing sadness. It was the kind of sadness that lets you move on, recognizing some stories don't have happy endings, but that doesn't stop others from having them. Clarissa kept sporadic contact through letters. She had married too, was happy as a teacher, building her own life far from Margaret's shadow. The letters were short but affectionate, and over time, Eleanor discovered she could read about her sister without pain, could even feel genuine joy for her success. Time passed, and the farm prospered. Gabriel was a fair and intelligent manager. Eleanor a figure loved by all workers and their families. The children grew healthy and happy. John was a curious boy who followed his father through the fields, asking 1,000 questions. Anne, a determined girl who followed her mother and already knew the alphabet letters at 3 years old. It was on a full moon night, 5 years after the wedding, that Gabriel and Eleanor were on the same porch where the first kiss happened, where they had read books together, where they had built the foundation of everything that came after. The twins slept in the next room. Mrs. Higgins snored softly in hers. The whole house breathed peace. "Are you happy?" asked Gabriel suddenly, turning to look at Eleanor. She thought about the question, really thought. Thought about the girl she had been, broken and without hope. Thought about the woman she had become, whole and full of purpose. Thought about the life she had built brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. "I am happy in a way I didn't know was possible," she answered honestly. "There are still hard days, nights where I wake up scared thinking I'm back in the closet. But then I wake up for real, see you beside me, hear our children breathing, smell the house that is mine, and realize I didn't just survive, I won. I didn't beat my mother, because that's not a competition. I beat the idea that I was worth nothing. I beat the belief I didn't deserve love. I beat the fear that pain was all I was going to have, and I built this here, this beautiful life with you." Gabriel pulled her into a tight hug, chin resting on top of her head, and they stayed like that while the moon illuminated the fields and the future stretched ahead, full of promises they would keep together. Years later, when Eleanor was 32 and Gabriel 45, when the twins were 10 and 2 younger siblings had arrived to complete the family, when the school Eleanor founded served over 50 children in the region, someone from town asked her what the secret to happiness was. Eleanor thought about the question, thought about the long journey from the windowless closet to there. "There is no secret," she answered. "There is choice. I chose not to let pain define me. I chose to believe I deserved better. I chose to accept help when offered. I chose to forgive what I couldn't change. I chose to build instead of destroy. And mainly, I chose every day to love and be loved, even when it was scary, even when I didn't know how." Eleanor and Gabriel's story became legend in the region. People told of the girl treated like a slave by her own mother, who became a pillar of the community, of the widower farmer who chose kindness when he could have chosen indifference, of how true love heals wounds that seemed incurable. And when Eleanor died at 83, surrounded by children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and a whole community that loved her, her last words were to Gabriel, who held her hand even after 60 years together. "Thank you for showing me I was worth saving," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me to fly." And Gabriel, with tears running down his wrinkled face, but still those same attentive eyes that had seen the broken girl and chose to help, answered, "You always knew how to fly, my love. I just held your hand while you remembered how." Eleanor Abbott's life proved that no matter how dark the beginning, there is always the possibility of dawn. That true family isn't who shares blood, but who shares love. That strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time. And that sometimes a man with a watchful eye and generous heart can completely change the course of a life, not because he saved someone, but because he saw value when no one else did and had the courage to reach out a hand. And so ends the story of the girl who was used as a servant by her own mother, until a farmer took her not just to give her a life, but to build a life together with her, a life that proved love heals, kindness wins, and every person deserves a chance to start over and be truly happy.